The red sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the mining camp as Captain Lee Daho walked toward the Imperial outpost. His boots crunched on the rocky ground with each step. Behind him, the human settlement looked small and peaceful. Ahead, the Valaxian Empire had built their base like a fortress of metal and energy shields. Daho carried his old plasma rifle across his back. The weapon had seen many battles. Its metal surface showed scratches and dents from years of use. Sometimes it sparked when the power cell got too hot. The rifle looked tired, just like many of the weapons the human colonies used. The Valaxian guards at the gate watched him approach. They wore shining armor that reflected the sunlight. Their weapons hummed with energy. Everything about them looked new and powerful. When they saw Daho's worn equipment, they started to laugh. "Look at this human," one guard said to another in their clicking language. "His gun looks ready to fall apart." Daho understood their words. All colonial officers learned basic Valaxian. He kept walking without showing any reaction. The guards opened the gate and let him pass. They were still laughing as he entered the compound. Inside the base, more Imperial soldiers stopped their work to stare. They pointed at his rifle and whispered to each other. Some made jokes about human technology being ancient. Others wondered why their commanders even bothered meeting with such a weak species. The main building stood in the center of the compound. It was tall and smooth, made from materials that seemed to glow with their own light. Daho had never seen anything like it on human worlds. The Empire had resources that most species could only dream about. Sub-Commander Vextar waited in the main hall. He was larger than most Valaxians, with blue-black scales that covered his reptilian body. His eyes were yellow and cold. When he saw Daho enter, his mouth opened to show rows of sharp teeth in what might have been a smile. "So the humans finally send someone to talk," Vextar said in perfect English. His voice was deep and rough. "I expected someone more impressive." Daho stopped in front of the sub-commander's desk. He did not salute or show any sign of fear. "I am Captain Lee Daho of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. I come under diplomatic protection to discuss your presence on this world." Vextar's laugh filled the room. Several Imperial officers who stood nearby joined in. "Diplomatic protection," the sub-commander repeated. "You think your little colonial government can protect you here?" "This world belongs to human colonists," Daho said calmly. "You have no legal right to establish military bases here. The Galactic Council recognizes our claim." "The Galactic Council," Vextar spat. The word sounded like an insult in his mouth. "A group of weak species who talk instead of taking action. The Empire does not care about their opinions." Daho reached slowly into his jacket. The Imperial guards raised their weapons, but he only pulled out a data pad. "These are the official documents. They show human settlement rights going back 50 years. Your forces arrived 3 months ago without permission." Vextar took the data pad and threw it on the floor without looking at it. "Papers mean nothing. Strength is what matters in this galaxy. The strong take what they want. The weak serve or die." "Then you refuse to recognize human rights to this world," Daho said. "It was not a question." "I refuse to waste more time on this foolishness," Vextar replied. He stood up from his chair. Even sitting, he had been taller than Daho. Standing, he towered over the human captain. "Let me show you what real power looks like." The sub-commander walked toward the exit. His officers followed behind him. Daho had no choice but to walk with them. Outside, Vextar led them to a weapon testing area at the edge of the compound. "Bring the heavy cannon," Vextar ordered. 2 Imperial soldiers rolled a large weapon into position. It was sleek and deadly looking. Energy crackled along its barrel. The weapon was bigger than most human vehicles. "Watch carefully, human," Vextar said. He pointed toward a line of large rocks about 500 meters away. "See those stones? Each one is harder than your strongest building materials." Vextar nodded to the weapon operator. The cannon fired with a sound like thunder. A beam of pure energy shot across the distance. When it hit the rocks, they did not just break apart. They turned into glowing vapor that drifted away in the wind. The Imperial soldiers cheered. Some of them looked at Daho to see his reaction. They expected him to be afraid or impressed. Instead, his face showed nothing. "Now you understand," Vextar said. "This is just one of our smallest weapons. Our ships in orbit carry cannons that could destroy your entire settlement in minutes. Our soldiers wear armor that your weapons cannot scratch. We have hover tanks that move faster than your aircraft." Daho looked at the place where the rocks had been. Only smooth glass remained, still glowing from the heat. Impressive technology, he said. More than impressive, Vextar corrected. Overwhelming. You humans cling to your old weapons and outdated ships. You think courage can defeat superior firepower. You are wrong. The sub-commander walked closer to Deho. Look at your rifle, human. It is held together with repair patches. It sparks when you move too quickly. My soldiers could destroy it with their sidearms. Several Imperial troops had gathered to watch the demonstration. They laughed when Vextar mentioned the sparking rifle. One of them made a joke about human weapons being museum pieces. Deho shifted the rifle on his back. As he moved, the weapon made a small electrical sound. More laughter came from the watching soldiers. Even some of the officers smiled at the pathetic display. You have made your point, Deho said. The Empire has superior weapons. Then you will recommend that your colony surrender, Vextar said. We offer fair terms. Your people can remain as workers in our mining operation. You will be fed and housed. It is better than death. Deho was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be thinking about the offer. The Imperial soldiers watched him with satisfaction. Another human colony would bow to the Empire's might. I need to discuss this with my people, Deho finally said. How long will you give us to decide? Vextar's smile became wider. You have until tomorrow at dawn. If you have not surrendered by then, we will take the colony by force. Your choice is simple. Serve willingly or serve as slaves. Deho nodded slowly. I understand. He started to turn away, then stopped. One question, Sub-Commander. You seem very confident in your weapons and your ships. Of course, Vextar replied. Why should I not be confident? No reason, Deho said. As he adjusted his rifle again, it made another small spark. The sound seemed louder than before. Sometimes the oldest things are more useful than they look. He walked toward the gate without waiting for a response. The Imperial guards opened it for him, still amused by his ancient weapon. As he passed through, Deho touched a small component on his rifle that looked like battle damage. To the watching Valaxians, it seemed like just another broken part on a useless gun. They had no way of knowing that the component had just sent a very important signal into space. The message was simple but clear. Target coordinates confirmed. Orbital bombardment solutions calculated. Standing by for further orders. Captain Lee Deho walked back toward the human settlement with the same steady pace he had used coming to the meeting. Behind him, the Imperial soldiers were already celebrating their easy victory over another primitive human colony. None of them noticed that the broken part of his rifle had stopped sparking completely. Captain Lee Deho walked through the main street of the human settlement as the sun began to set. The buildings were simple but sturdy. Most were made from local stone and metal brought from Earth years ago. Children played in the dusty roads while their parents worked in shops and small factories. The settlement had 53 people total. 22 were adults who could fight if needed. The rest were children, elderly folks, or people who worked as doctors and teachers. Against hundreds of Imperial soldiers with advanced weapons, they had no chance in a direct fight. Deho reached the Colonial Administration Building. It was the largest structure in town, but still small compared to anything in the Valaxian base. Inside, 3 people waited for him in the main office. Sergeant Kim Minji stood by the window watching the Imperial base through binoculars. She was 32 years old and had served in the colonial forces for 8 years. Her black hair was tied back in a practical style. She wore the same worn uniform as Deho, with patches covering old tears and stains. How did it go, Captain? She asked without turning around. About as expected, Deho replied. He set his rifle against the wall. The weapon made its familiar sparking sound. They gave us until dawn to surrender. Corporal Park Junho looked up from a table covered with maps and equipment lists. He was younger than the others, only 25, but he knew more about weapons than anyone else in the settlement. His specialty was making old equipment work better than it should. Dawn gives us maybe 10 hours, Junho said. Not much time to prepare defenses. The third person in the room was Han Soyoung. She worked as the communication specialist for the colony. Her job was to keep contact with other human settlements and sometimes with Earth itself. She sat at a complex radio setup that took up most of one wall. Any word from the fleet, Deho asked her. Soyoung shook her head. Nothing on regular channels. But I did pick up some strange signals about an hour ago. Very faint. Could be ships moving in the outer system. Deho smiled for the first time since returning from the Imperial base. Good. That means the beacon worked. The other 3 looked at him with confusion. Minji finally asked what they were all thinking. What beacon, Captain? And what fleet? Daeho picked up his old rifle. He pointed to a small device attached near the trigger guard. It looked like a piece of broken metal that had been welded on as a field repair. This isn't battle damage. It's a quantum targeting beacon. Junho leaned closer to examine the device. I've never seen anything like that before. It's new technology, Daeho explained. Very secret. When I activated it at the Imperial base, it scanned their entire compound. Now it has exact coordinates for every building, every vehicle, every weapon position. Coordinates for what? Minji asked. Orbital bombardment, Daeho said simply. The room fell silent. So-young was the first to speak. You mean there really is a fleet coming? 3 dreadnoughts, Daeho confirmed. They've been waiting at the edge of the system for my signal. The Terran Federation knew the Valaxians would try something like this. We just needed proof and targeting data. Minji lowered her binoculars. So we don't have to fight them ourselves? We still need to survive until the fleet arrives, Daeho said. The Valaxians will attack at dawn. The fleet won't be in bombardment range for at least 2 hours after that. We need to hold out. Junho studied the maps on his table. 2 hours against hover tanks and energy weapons, with 22 people and old equipment. 21, So-young corrected. Mrs. Yang hurt her back yesterday. She can't fight. The situation looked impossible. Everyone in the room knew it. But Daeho seemed calm, almost confident. He had been planning this for weeks. The Valaxians have better weapons, he said, but they also have weaknesses. They're arrogant. They think we're helpless. They won't expect organized resistance. He moved to the table and pointed at different locations on the map. Minji, I want you to set up defensive positions here, here, and here. Make them look desperate and random. Let the Valaxians think we're panicking. What about the civilians? Minji asked. Start moving them to the old mining tunnels tonight. Tell them it's just a precaution. The tunnels are deep enough to survive orbital bombardment from the Imperial ship. Junho raised his hand. Captain, what about our weapons? These old plasma rifles won't even scratch Valaxian armor. They don't need to, Daeho replied. We're not trying to win the battle. We just need to make enough noise to keep their attention. Make them think they're fighting our main force. So-young looked confused. If we're not the main force, then what is? Daeho tapped his rifle's beacon again. 3 Federation dreadnoughts with enough firepower to glass this entire continent. But they need the Valaxians to stay in position for the bombardment to work. The plan started to make sense to the others. They weren't trying to defeat the Empire's forces. They were trying to hold them in place long enough for the real attack to begin. What if the fleet doesn't arrive in time? Minji asked. Then we'll have done our duty, Daeho said. But I have confidence in Admiral Cho. He's never missed a deadline. Over the next few hours, the small human team worked to prepare their settlement for battle. They moved the civilians into the tunnels with food and water for several days. They set up defensive positions that looked realistic, but wouldn't actually stop Imperial weapons. Most importantly, they made sure the beacon in Daeho's rifle kept transmitting. Every few minutes, it sent updated information about Valaxian positions to the approaching fleet. The device used quantum encryption that even the Empire's best technology couldn't detect or decode. Meanwhile, at the Imperial base, Sub-Commander Vextar was making his own preparations. He gathered his officers for a final briefing before the morning attack. The humans have not responded to our offer, he told them. At dawn, we will take their settlement by force. This should be simple. They have no real weapons and no military training. One of his officers asked about casualties. Should we try to capture prisoners? Take a few for questioning, Vextar replied. Kill the rest. Dead humans cannot cause trouble later. Another officer suggested using the orbital bombardment from their cruiser to destroy the settlement quickly. Vextar rejected the idea. We want the mining equipment intact, he said. Ground forces will be sufficient. These humans will break and run as soon as they see our hover tanks. The Imperial soldiers spent the night checking their weapons and vehicles. They joked about the easy battle ahead. Some made bets about how quickly the humans would surrender once the shooting started. None of them noticed the strange readings on their quantum field detectors. The devices showed small fluctuations that could have meant incoming ships. But the Imperial tech specialists assumed the readings were just background noise from their own equipment. As the night passed, both sides prepared for battle in very different ways. The humans worked quietly to save lives and gather intelligence. The Valaxians prepared for what they thought would be a quick and easy victory. Dawn was only hours away. Soon everyone would learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who appears to be helpless. The first light of dawn painted the sky red above the human settlement. In the distance, the Valaxian base came alive with activity. Soldiers moved between buildings while hover tanks started their engines. The sound echoed across the rocky ground like distant thunder. Captain Lee Daeho crouched behind a barrier made from mining equipment and metal sheets. His old rifle rested against his shoulder. The targeting beacon attached to it showed a steady green light. Everything was ready. Sergeant Kim Minji spoke into her communication device. "All positions report in. Position 1 ready," came Corporal Park Junho's voice. He had set up near the water treatment plant with 2 colonial workers who knew how to shoot. "Position 2 ready," reported another voice. 3 more colonists waited behind the power generator building. "Position 3 ready." The last group hid near the equipment depot. Each position had been chosen carefully. They looked like desperate defensive points that scared civilians might choose. The Valaxians would see exactly what they expected to see. Han So-young sat in the administration building with her radio equipment. Her job was to coordinate the defense and maintain contact with the approaching fleet. So far, she had heard nothing but static on the military channels. At the Imperial base, Sub-Commander Vextar climbed into his command hover tank. The vehicle was twice the size of any human transport. Its armor could stop anything short of heavy artillery. Its main cannon could destroy buildings with a single shot. "Begin the orbital bombardment," Vextar ordered through his communicator. High above the planet, the Valaxian cruiser Dominant Fang turned its weapons toward the human settlement. The ship was over 1 kilometer long and carried enough firepower to destroy entire cities. Against 53 colonists, it seemed like massive overkill. The first energy beam struck the settlement's outer buildings. The shield generator exploded in a shower of sparks and metal. The communications tower collapsed with a crash that could be heard for kilometers. Several storage buildings simply vanished in clouds of superheated vapor. Daeho felt the ground shake beneath his feet. Chunks of debris rained down around his position. The orbital bombardment was just as devastating as Vextar had promised. "Shields are down," Minji reported. "We're taking heavy damage." "Hold positions," Daeho replied. "This is just the beginning." The bombardment continued for 10 minutes. When it finally stopped, much of the settlement lay in ruins. Smoke rose from burning buildings. The main street was filled with rubble and twisted metal. Vextar smiled with satisfaction as he surveyed the destruction through his tank's cameras. Now the ground assault would finish whatever survivors remained. "All units advance," he commanded. 12 hover tanks moved out from the Imperial base in a perfect formation. Behind them came 200 soldiers in powered armor. Their energy weapons hummed with deadly potential. Above them, 4 aircraft provided air support. The force looked unstoppable. It was designed to crush any resistance quickly and efficiently. Against most enemies, it would have worked perfectly. The Imperial advance reached the edge of the settlement without encountering any opposition. Vextar began to think the orbital bombardment had killed all the humans. Then the first shots rang out. Minji opened fire from position 1. Her old plasma rifle sent bright bolts of energy toward the nearest hover tank. The shot struck the vehicle's shields and dissolved harmlessly. But they got the Valaxians' attention. "Contact left," an Imperial officer reported. "Small arms fire from the water plant." Vextar turned his tank's main gun toward the building. The cannon fired once. The entire structure disappeared in a ball of flame and debris. "Position 1 destroyed," came the report. But even as the first human position was eliminated, Junho opened fire from position 2. His shots were just as ineffective against the Imperial armor, but they forced the Valaxians to turn and respond. The hover tank formation split up to engage multiple targets. Soldiers spread out to search the ruins for hidden humans. The organized advance became a messy hunt through smoking wreckage. This was exactly what Daeho had hoped for. The Valaxians were no longer moving in formation. They were scattered across the settlement area, focused on hunting down individual humans rather than completing their mission quickly. "Position 2, taking heavy fire," Junho reported. A moment later, his voice cut off as another building exploded. "Position 3, fall back to secondary positions," Daeho ordered. "Make them chase you." The surviving colonists abandoned their positions and ran deeper into the settlement. They fired wild shots as they moved, keeping the Imperial forces engaged. The Valaxians followed, thinking they were mopping up the last desperate resistance. Vextar climbed out of his hover tank to survey the battlefield personally. Dead humans lay scattered among the ruins. A few survivors ran between buildings, firing useless weapons before being cut down by Imperial soldiers. "Too easy," he said to one of his officers. "I expected more fight from the humans." "They are weak, Sub-Commander," the officer replied. "Their weapons cannot harm our armor. Their tactics are primitive." As if to prove the point, another human appeared from behind a collapsed wall. It was Captain Deho himself, still carrying his old rifle. He was less than 50 meters away from Vextar's position. "There," Vextar pointed, "the one who came to negotiate yesterday." Imperial soldiers turned their weapons toward Deho. He seemed to be trapped in the open with nowhere to run. His rifle sparked as he raised it, just as it had during the diplomatic meeting. "Surrender, human," Vextar called out. "Your people are dead or dying. Your weapons are useless. Submit now and you will serve the Empire as a laborer instead of dying here in the dust." Deho looked around at the destruction of his settlement. Smoke and fire were everywhere. The sounds of battle were fading as the last colonists were hunted down. Everything looked hopeless for the human defenders. "You're right about my weapons," Deho shouted back. "This old rifle has seen better days." He held up the weapon so Vextar could see it clearly. The targeting beacon was still attached, still looking like a piece of battle damage. It continued to transmit coordinates to empty space, though the Valaxians had no way of knowing that. "But you made one big mistake," Deho continued. "You never asked what I was really aiming at." Vextar laughed. Several of his soldiers joined in. The idea that this human's ancient weapon could threaten the mighty Valaxian Empire seemed ridiculous. "What could you possibly aim at that would matter?" Vextar asked. "Your settlement is destroyed. Your people are defeated. Your pathetic rifle cannot even scratch our armor." Deho smiled. It was not the expression of a defeated man. "I wasn't aiming at you," he said. High above the planet, space began to shimmer with new energy signatures. The quantum fields that the Imperial sensors had dismissed as background noise suddenly became much stronger. In her hiding place in the tunnels, Han So-young heard her radio crackle with an incoming transmission. The voice was clear and professional, speaking with a Korean accent that sounded like home. "Colonial Defense Force. This is Admiral Cho Hyun-woo commanding the Federation Third Fleet. We have your targeting data and are moving into bombardment position. Recommend all friendly forces take cover immediately." So-young grabbed her communicator. "Captain Deho, the fleet has arrived. Admiral Cho says to take cover now." On the surface, Deho heard the message through his earpiece. He looked up at Vextar, who was still laughing at the human's apparent desperation. "Sub-Commander," Deho said politely, "you might want to look up." Vextar raised his eyes toward the sky. For a moment, he saw nothing but the red morning light. Then 3 massive shapes dropped out of hyperspace directly above the settlement. The Federation dreadnoughts TFS Incheon, TFS Busan, and TFS Daegu hung in the air like metal mountains. Each ship was over 2 kilometers long and bristled with enough weapons to destroy entire fleets. Their arrival sent shockwaves through the atmosphere that shook the ground below. Vextar's expression changed from amusement to horror in the space of a heartbeat. "Impossible," he whispered. "Actually," Deho said as he dove for cover behind the nearest piece of rubble, "it's just good planning." The sky above the Imperial forces began to rain death from the stars. Admiral Cho Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of the TFS Incheon as his fleet moved into position above Kepler 442b. The massive dreadnought shuddered slightly as its main engines adjusted course. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with calm efficiency. "Targeting data received and confirmed," reported the weapons officer. "We have precise coordinates on all Imperial positions." "Enemy cruiser attempting to break orbit," called out the sensor operator. "The dominant Fang is turning to flee." Admiral Cho studied the tactical display. The Valaxian ship was indeed trying to escape, but it was too late. His 3 dreadnoughts had positioned themselves to cut off any retreat routes. "Signal the Busan and Daegu," he ordered. "Primary target is the enemy cruiser. Secondary targets are ground forces. Begin bombardment in 30 seconds. On the surface, Sub-Commander Vextar stared up at the Federation warships in disbelief. Each vessel was twice the size of his cruiser and carried weapons that made Imperial technology look like toys. How had the humans managed to bring such firepower to this remote system? "All units retreat to base immediately," he shouted into his communicator. Request immediate pickup from the dominant Fang. But the Imperial cruiser had its own problems. Captain Zektar watched his display screens fill with targeting indicators as the Federation ships locked weapons onto his vessel. Shields to maximum, he ordered. All power to engines. We need to reach hyperspace. The dominant Fang's drives flared to life, pushing the cruiser toward the edge of the system. If they could reach the minimum safe distance, they could jump away and report this disaster to the Empire. But the Federation ships were already firing. The first salvo came from the TFS Busan. 12 kinetic bombardment rods launched from the dreadnought's main guns. Each projectile was a solid tungsten cylinder accelerated to 10% of light speed. They struck the Valaxian cruiser's shields like hammers of the gods. The Imperial shields lasted exactly 4 seconds against the bombardment. The remaining kinetic rounds punched through the hull as if it were made of paper. Explosions bloomed along the cruiser's length as critical systems overloaded. Direct hits on the enemy vessel, reported the Busan's weapons officer. Their shields are down and they're losing power. Admiral Cho nodded with satisfaction. Continue firing until the target is destroyed. All ships begin ground bombardment. The 3 dreadnoughts turned their remaining weapons toward the planet's surface. The targeting data from Daeho's beacon showed them exactly where to aim. Every Imperial position, every vehicle, every weapon emplacement was marked for destruction. On the ground, Vextar realized his mistake too late. The humans had never intended to fight his forces directly. They had been calling in an orbital strike from the beginning. The rusty rifle that his troops had mocked was actually a sophisticated targeting system. "Take cover," he screamed to his soldiers. Incoming bombardment. The Imperial forces scattered, abandoning their vehicles and running for any shelter they could find. But there was nowhere to hide from what came next. The first kinetic strikes hit the hover tank formation. The tungsten rods punched through their armor like it was made of cloth. Each impact released energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon. The tanks simply vanished in balls of superheated plasma. Vextar threw himself behind a pile of rubble as the bombardment continued. All around him, his carefully planned assault force was being systematically destroyed. The humans had turned his technological superiority against him. "Sir, the base is under attack," came a panicked voice over his communicator. "They're hitting our ammunition depot." Vextar looked toward the Imperial outpost just in time to see it disappear in a massive explosion. The energy weapon storage had taken a direct hit. The blast was so bright it temporarily blinded his optical sensors. In the tunnels beneath the human settlement, the colonists felt the impacts through the solid rock. Each strike shook the ground like an earthquake. Dust fell from the ceiling with every explosion. "How long will this last?" asked one of the civilian miners. Han So-young listened to the tactical chatter on her radio. "Admiral Cho is being very thorough," she replied. "He wants to make sure there are no Imperial survivors to report back to their fleet." Above ground, Captain Daeho crawled through the ruins toward a better observation position. The orbital bombardment was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen. Pillars of light connected the sky to the ground as kinetic rounds streaked downward. Each impact eliminated another piece of Imperial equipment. Hover tanks, aircraft, weapons emplacements, and communication arrays all vanished under the precise bombardment. The Valaxians' technological advantage meant nothing against weapons fired from orbit. "Colonial Defense Force, this is Admiral Cho," came the voice over Daeho's communicator. "Ground bombardment will cease in 2 minutes. Prepare to secure any surviving enemy forces." Daeho keyed his radio. "Understood, Admiral. Most Imperial forces appear to be neutralized. I can see scattered survivors, but they seem to be in full retreat." "Copy that, Captain. Be advised that we're deploying special forces to assist with cleanup operations. Transport ships will arrive in 15 minutes. Across the battlefield, the few surviving Valaxian soldiers emerged from whatever cover they had found. Their shining armor was now blackened and cracked. Their advanced weapons lay abandoned among the debris. The proud Imperial force had been reduced to a handful of shocked survivors. Vextar pulled himself out of a crater that had once been his command tank. Half of his scales were burned off and his left arm hung useless at his side. Around him, the landscape looked like the surface of a dead moon. Nothing remained of his military equipment except scattered metal fragments. "Sub-Commander," called one of his surviving officers. "What are your orders?" Vextar looked up at the Federation dreadnoughts still hanging in the sky like metal gods. Then he looked at the human captain who was walking toward their position with his battered rifle still slung across his back. Surrender, Vextar said quietly. Signal all remaining forces to lay down their weapons. The officer stared at him in shock. Sir, the Empire does not surrender. The Empire is not here, Vextar replied bitterly. We are. Deho approached the group of Imperial survivors with his hands visible and empty. He no longer needed his weapon. The battle was over and everyone knew it. Sub-Commander Vextar, he said politely, I believe we need to finish our diplomatic discussion. Vextar looked at the human who had orchestrated his defeat. Yesterday he had dismissed this man as a primitive fool with obsolete equipment. Now he understood that he had been facing a tactical genius who had outmaneuvered the entire Imperial force. How long have you been planning this? Vextar asked. Since the first Imperial ship entered this system, Deho replied. We knew you would come eventually. The quantum crystals on this world are too valuable to ignore, so we prepared. The beacon in your rifle, Deho nodded. Quantum targeting technology. Very new, very secret. It allowed our fleet to target your forces with perfect accuracy, even from beyond sensor range. Vextar's remaining officers looked stunned. They had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior planning. The humans had used their own arrogance against them. In orbit, the burning wreckage of the dominant Fang drifted between the Federation dreadnoughts. The Imperial cruiser had lasted less than 5 minutes against concentrated fire from 3 of humanity's most advanced warships. All enemy vessels destroyed, reported the sensor officer. No Imperial survivors in space. Admiral Cho studied the tactical display. The battle had gone exactly according to plan. The Valaxians had fallen into the trap perfectly, concentrating their forces in a single location where orbital bombardment could eliminate them efficiently. Signal command, he ordered. Mission accomplished. Imperial expedition to Kepler 442b has been neutralized. Recommend establishing permanent fleet presence in this system. The message would reach Earth in a few hours. When it did, the news would spread throughout human space. The mighty Valaxian Empire had suffered a major defeat at the hands of a small colonial defense force and 3 determined ship captains. But more importantly, other species in the galaxy would learn that humanity was not as helpless as it appeared. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who looked weakest. The smoke was still rising from the destroyed Imperial positions when the first Federation transport ships appeared in the sky. They descended through the atmosphere with practiced precision, their hulls gleaming silver against the red morning light. Captain Lee Deho watched the ships land near the ruins of the human settlement. Each transport was larger than any vehicle the colonists had ever seen. When their cargo bays opened, armed soldiers in advanced combat armor emerged in perfect formation. These were not colonial defense troops. They wore the black and silver uniforms of Terran Federation Special Forces. Their equipment looked almost as advanced as Valaxian gear, but with a human touch that made it seem more practical and reliable. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Tae-hyung stepped out of the lead transport. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had seen many battles. His armor was marked with the insignia of the Federation's elite counter-imperial operations unit. Captain Deho, he said as he approached. Admiral Cho sends his compliments. The orbital bombardment was very effective. Deho saluted. Thank you, sir. The targeting beacon worked perfectly. Most Imperial forces have been eliminated or scattered. Most, Yoon repeated, but not all. He gestured toward the group of surviving Valaxian soldiers who sat under guard near the burned wreckage of their vehicles. Sub-Commander Vextar was among them, his scales still blackened from the bombardment. The Imperial officer stared at the ground, no longer showing any of his earlier arrogance. The survivors have surrendered, Deho reported. They're requesting transport off-world according to the Galactic War Conventions. Yoon studied the Imperial prisoners for a moment. That might have been acceptable yesterday, but something happened about an hour ago that changed the situation. Deho felt a cold worry in his stomach. What happened? Sub-Commander Vextar attempted to take civilian hostages, Yoon explained. After the orbital bombardment ended, he gathered some of your colonists at gunpoint. He threatened to execute them unless Admiral Cho agreed to let his surviving forces escape. The worry became anger. Our people are safe. They are now, Yoon confirmed. But the Empire crossed a line when they threatened non-combatants. That changes everything. As if summoned by their conversation, Vextar looked up at the 2 human officers. His yellow eyes still held traces of his former pride. though it was mixed with fear and confusion. "I demand to speak with your commander," he called out. "The Galactic War Conventions guarantee proper treatment for military prisoners." Yoon walked over to where the Imperial officer sat. "You want to discuss conventions, Sub-Commander? Let's talk about the Convention on Protection of Civilians, the one that forbids threatening non-combatants during military operations." Vextar's expression became defensive. Those were legitimate military hostages taken during active combat operations. "Those were children and elderly colonists who posed no military threat," Yoon replied coldly. "You violated interstellar law the moment you pointed weapons at them." Behind Yoon, more Federation soldiers were emerging from the transport ships. But these were not regular troops. They moved with the deadly grace of specialists trained for the most dangerous missions. Each one carried weapons designed specifically for fighting Valaxian forces. Daeho recognized the equipment from intelligence briefings. Quantum phase rifles that could penetrate Imperial armor. Adaptive camouflage systems that made soldiers nearly invisible. Neural disruptor grenades that could incapacitate Valaxian nervous systems without permanent harm. "What's going to happen to them?" Daeho asked quietly. "That depends on them," Yoon replied. "We're offering the regular soldiers a choice. They can accept transport to a Federation detention facility, where they'll be held according to military law, or they can choose immediate repatriation to Imperial space." "And Vextar," Yoon's expression hardened. "He threatened civilians. Under Federation law, that makes him a war criminal. He'll face trial on Earth." Across the landing area, Han So-young emerged from the tunnel system leading a group of colonists. They looked shaken but unharmed. The children stayed close to their parents, still frightened by the morning's violence. Among them was elderly Mrs. Yang, who had been one of the hostages Vextar had threatened. She walked with the help of her adult son, but her eyes were clear and angry. "Is it over?" she asked when she saw Daeho. "It's over," he confirmed. "The Imperial forces have been defeated. You're safe now." Mrs. Yang looked toward the prisoners, then at the Federation soldiers guarding them. "Good. Those lizards thought they could scare us into submission. They learned better." Her words carried across the area. Several of the Imperial prisoners heard her and looked ashamed. They had expected an easy victory over frightened colonists. Instead, they had found determined humans backed by advanced military technology. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon gathered his troops for final operations. "Search teams, check every crater and building for Imperial survivors. Medical teams, tend to any wounded colonists. Intelligence teams, secure all Imperial equipment and documents." The Special Forces soldiers spread out across the battlefield with professional efficiency. Within minutes, they had established a secure perimeter and begun cataloging the destroyed Imperial equipment. One of the search teams found something interesting in the ruins of Vextar's command tank. They called Yoon over to examine a partially melted communication device. "Sir, this appears to be a quantum transmitter," the team leader reported. "It might have been sending data back to Imperial space during the battle." Yoon studied the device carefully. "Can you tell what kind of data?" "Tactical information, sir. Details about our weapons performance, ship numbers, and battle tactics. If this got through, the Empire will know exactly what happened here." Daeho joined them at the crash site. "Is that good or bad for us?" Both, Yoon replied. "Bad because they'll know our capabilities and adjust their tactics accordingly. Good because they'll also know we're not as helpless as they thought." He looked up at the Federation dreadnoughts still hanging in orbit. "The Empire has been expanding for centuries by crushing species they consider primitive. Now they know that humanity fights back with intelligence and advanced technology. Will they try to retaliate?" Daeho asked. "Probably," Yoon admitted, "but not here and not soon. This defeat will force them to reconsider their entire strategy for dealing with human colonies." As the afternoon wore on, more Federation ships arrived in the system. Transport vessels brought supplies and construction equipment to help rebuild the settlement. Medical ships evacuated the most seriously wounded colonists for treatment at Federation facilities. Most importantly, a permanent garrison force arrived to establish a military base on Kepler 442b. The planet would never again be vulnerable to Imperial attack. Sub-Commander. Vextar watched these preparations from his detention area. He had begun this operation confident that his advanced technology and superior firepower would easily defeat the primitive humans. Now he was a prisoner watching Federation forces establish. dominance over what had been Imperial territory just hours before. How did we underestimate them so badly? Asked one of his surviving officers. Vextar thought about the question for a long time before answering. We saw their old equipment and assumed they were weak. We never considered that they might be choosing to appear weak while preparing stronger weapons. But their rifle really was ancient. The officer protested. I saw it sparking myself. The rifle was old, Vextar agreed. But the targeting system attached to it was more advanced than anything in our fleet. They hid new technology inside old equipment so we wouldn't recognize the threat. He looked toward where Captain Daiho was coordinating with the Federation forces. The human still carried his battered rifle, which still sparked occasionally when he moved. But now Vextar understood that the weapon was far more dangerous than it appeared. That's how humans fight, he said quietly. They make you underestimate them, then strike when you least expect it. As evening approached, Lieutenant Colonel Yoon prepared to transport the Imperial prisoners to Federation custody. Most of the regular soldiers had chosen detention over repatriation, preferring human justice to Imperial punishment for failure. Vextar would face trial on Earth for war crimes. If convicted, he would spend the rest of his life in a Federation prison. It was better than the execution he would receive from his own empire for losing an entire expedition. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b, the news had spread across the entire galaxy. The story traveled through hyperspace communication networks, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees from Imperial territory. Everywhere it went, the same message was repeated in dozens of languages and thousands of variations. The mighty Valaxian Empire had been defeated by humans with old weapons. On the Imperial capital world of Zalthara, Emperor Zalthon sat in his crystalline throne room listening to reports from across his territory. The news was not good. 17 colony worlds had declared independence since word of the Kepler defeat reached them. 3 species that had served the Empire for decades were now in open rebellion. The humans have made us look weak, complained General Vexmore, the Emperor's chief military advisor. Our subject species no longer fear Imperial might. They should fear it, Zalthon replied, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. We still have thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. But they have seen those ships and soldiers defeated, Vexmore pointed out. The humans destroyed an entire expedition with only 3 vessels. Our enemies now believe we can be beaten. The Emperor's scaled hands gripped the arms of his throne. For 800 years, the Valaxian Empire had expanded through careful displays of overwhelming force. Subject species surrendered quickly when they saw Imperial technology in action. Now that strategy was failing. What do the intelligence reports tell us about human capabilities? Zalthon asked. Admiral Kextar, recently promoted to replace his dead predecessor, stepped forward with a data pad. The analysis is troubling, Your Majesty. The humans appear to have technology equal to or superior to our own, but they disguise it to appear primitive. How is that possible? We believe they use a strategy of technological deception, Kextar explained. They make their weapons look old and damaged while hiding advanced systems inside. Their enemies underestimate them until it's too late. The Emperor studied the tactical reports from the battle. The human dreadnoughts had destroyed the dominant Fang in minutes. Their orbital bombardment had eliminated ground forces with surgical precision. Most disturbing of all, they had coordinated the entire operation using a single soldier with equipment that looked like scrap metal. What about Sub-Commander Vextar? Zalthon asked. Has he provided useful information about human tactics? Vextar is being held on Earth awaiting trial, Admiral Kextar reported. The humans refuse all requests for prisoner exchange. They claim he violated laws protecting civilians. Civilians? General Vexmore spat. Since when do warriors worry about non-combatants? Since humans made it a war crime, the Admiral replied. Their military code is very strict about protecting innocent people. Any Imperial officer who threatens civilians will face their courts. This was perhaps the most disturbing news of all. The Empire had always used fear of civilian casualties to force quick surrenders. If humans were willing to fight total war to protect non-combatants, Imperial tactics would need major changes. Your Majesty, interrupted a communication officer, we're receiving reports of human fleet movements in the Kepler sector. 3 more dreadnoughts have arrived at the mining world. Zalthon's expression darkened. They're establishing a permanent presence. Not just there, Admiral Kextar added. Human fleets are taking positions near 17 of our border worlds. They're not attacking, but they're making their presence known. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer content to defend only their own colonies. They were projecting power into Imperial space, daring the Empire to make another move. On Earth, in the Terran Federation capital of Geneva, Admiral Cho Hyunwoo briefed the Defense Council on the strategic situation. The massive holographic display showed Imperial and Federation positions throughout the local galactic arm. The Kepler operation was a complete success, he reported. Imperial forces have withdrawn from 12 disputed systems. 3 new species have requested Federation protection from Imperial aggression. Defense Minister Park Ji-young studied the tactical display. What about Imperial response? Are they planning retaliation? Our intelligence suggests the Empire is conducting a major strategic review, Admiral Cho replied. They're discovering that their expansion tactics don't work against prepared opponents. And Captain Daeho's report on Valaxian capabilities. Admiral Cho smiled. Very thorough. The targeting beacon recorded complete technical specifications on all Imperial equipment. Our engineers are already developing countermeasures. The beacon that had looked like battle damage on Daeho's rifle had been recording everything during his visit to the Imperial base. Now Federation scientists knew exactly how Valaxian shields, weapons, and armor functioned. Future battles would be even more one-sided. Back on Kepler 442b, Major Lee Daeho stood in his new office overlooking the expanded human settlement. His promotion had come with command of the Colonial Defense Headquarters for the entire sector. Federation engineers had built the facility into the mountainside, making it nearly impregnable. His old rifle hung on the wall behind his desk, finally repaired and restored to perfect condition. The targeting beacon had been removed and replaced with standard components. But Daeho kept the weapon as a reminder of how the most dangerous tools often looked the most harmless. Sergeant Kim Minji entered the office carrying daily reports. She had been promoted to Master Sergeant and now commanded the base's security force. Her new equipment was state-of-the-art Federation technology, but she still carried her old plasma rifle as a backup weapon. Sir, we've received word from the Vega colonies, she reported. 2 more species have applied for Federation membership. They want protection from Imperial expansion. Daeho nodded as he reviewed the applications. The Manthari were aquatic engineers whose homeworld sat near the Imperial border. The Kethavar were silicon-based miners who had been paying tribute to the Empire for 50 years. Both species offered valuable skills to the Federation. What's the status of our new garrison forces? He asked. The 23rd Marine Regiment finished deployment yesterday, Minji replied. Colonel Yoon reports all defensive positions are fully operational. Any Imperial force trying to retake this world will face 6,000 Federation troops with full orbital support. Through his office window, Daeho could see the bustling activity of the expanded settlement. The population had grown to over 2,000 as Federation personnel, civilian contractors, and refugees from Imperial space arrived daily. The quantum crystal mines were now under full production, providing resources for the Federation's growing military. Most importantly, the world had become a symbol. Kepler 442b proved that humans would fight to defend their people and their principles. Other species looked to the Federation as an alternative to Imperial domination. Sir, there's one more thing, Minji said. We received a message from Sub-Commander Vextar on Earth. He's requesting permission to speak with you. Daeho was surprised. What does he want? He didn't say. The message just asked if you would accept a communication from him before his trial begins. Daeho thought about it for several minutes. Vextar had been his opponent, but also the catalyst for humanity's first major victory over the Empire. Perhaps the Valaxian officer had something useful to say. Set up the communication, he decided. I'll speak with him. The holographic display in his office flickered to life, showing the interior of a Federation detention facility on Earth. Vextar sat in a simple but comfortable room. His scales had healed from the battle damage, but his eyes showed the strain of captivity and impending trial. Captain Daeho, Vextar said, then corrected himself. Major Daeho, I congratulate you on your promotion. Thank you, Daeho replied carefully. You asked to speak with me. What do you want? Vextar was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to understand something. When you came to negotiate, you already knew your fleet was coming. You could have simply waited for the orbital bombardment and destroyed us without warning. That's correct. Then why did you come at all? Why risk a diplomatic meeting when you had overwhelming military superiority? Deho leaned back in his chair. It was a good question, and one that revealed something important about the difference between human and imperial thinking. Because we hoped you would leave voluntarily, he said. War should be the last option, not the first one. If you had agreed to withdraw, no one would have died. Vextar looked genuinely puzzled. But you had superior force. By imperial logic, you should have used it immediately to establish dominance. By human logic, unnecessary killing is wasteful and immoral, Deho replied. We fight when we have to. We prefer to solve problems through negotiation when possible, even when negotiation means revealing your presence to the enemy. Even then. Vextar sat in silence for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, he spoke again. I have been studying human military history during my detention. Your species has a saying, peace through strength. One of our sayings, yes. The Empire's version is different, strength through conquest. We believe power comes from taking what others have. You believe power comes from being strong enough that others choose not to fight you. Deho nodded. That's a fair summary. It explains why our expansion has stopped, Vextar said. For centuries, we conquered species that were weaker than us. 1 year after the Battle of Kepler 442b, the galaxy looked very different than it had before. Major Lee Deho stood in the observation deck of the newly built Federation Station Alpha, watching ships from dozen different species dock at the massive orbital facility. The station orbited Kepler 442b at a distance that gave it command over all traffic entering the system. It was 10 kilometers long and housed 50,000 people from across the galaxy. The design was human, but the workers who built it came from 20 different worlds. Sir, the morning briefing is ready, announced Lieutenant Park Suman, Deho's new aide. She was young and eager, fresh from the Federation Military Academy on Earth. Like many officers of her generation, she had joined the service after hearing stories about the Kepler battle. Deho followed her to the station's main briefing room. The chamber was large enough to hold representatives from all the species now under Federation protection. Today's meeting would include humans, Manthari, Kethvar, Zelani, and 6 other species that had joined the Federation in the past year. Admiral Cho Hyunwoo appeared on the main display screen, broadcasting from his flagship somewhere near the Imperial border. His hair was grayer than it had been during the Kepler battle, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of humanity's most respected commanders. Good morning, everyone, the Admiral began. I have updates on Imperial activity throughout the sector. The holographic display showed a map of local space. Imperial territory was marked in red, Federation space in blue, and neutral systems in yellow. Over the past year, the red areas had been shrinking while the blue areas expanded. The Empire has withdrawn from 15 more systems in the past month, Admiral Cho reported. Our intelligence suggests they're consolidating forces around their core worlds. They appear to be adopting a defensive strategy. Ambassador Kim Yoonji, the Federation's chief diplomat, raised her hand. Any indication of why they're withdrawing so quickly? Multiple reasons, the Admiral replied. First, they're facing rebellions on 37 worlds. Species that were conquered decades ago are demanding independence. Second, their military resources are stretched thin, trying to maintain control. Third, they're running short of the advanced materials needed for their weapons. This last point was particularly important. The Valaxian Empire had built their military superiority on quantum crystals and rare metals that came from conquered worlds. As those worlds rebelled or joined the Federation, the Empire lost access to critical resources. Captain Kim Minji, now commanding the station's defense forces, stood up to give her report. We've had contact with Imperial reconnaissance ships on 3 occasions this month. Each time, they maintained safe distance and withdrew when challenged. No hostile actions. They're testing our defenses, Admiral Cho observed, but they're being very careful not to provoke another direct confrontation. The reason was obvious to everyone in the room. The Empire had learned that fighting humans meant facing opponents who were both technologically advanced and tactically superior. Every Imperial commander now knew the story of Subcommander Vextar and his crushing defeat at Kepler 442b. What about our expansion plans? Asked Dr. Yoon Jiwoo, the Federation's chief science officer. She represented the civilian side of the Federation's growing influence in the galaxy. Admiral Cho switched the display to show planned Federation activities. We're establishing research stations in 12 systems with unique scientific properties. 3 new colonies are being founded on worlds that requested human protection. Most importantly, we're opening 5 new trade routes through former Imperial space. Trade was becoming as important as military power in the Federation's strategy. Human technology and industrial capacity were highly valued by other species. In exchange, the Federation gained access to raw materials, scientific knowledge, and strategic locations throughout the galaxy. Daiho listened to the briefings with mixed feelings. The Federation's growth was impressive, but he remembered when the biggest worry was protecting a single mining colony. Now they were responsible for the safety and prosperity of dozens of species across hundreds of worlds. "Sir," Lieutenant Park whispered to him, "you have a private communication waiting in your office." Daiho excused himself from the briefing and returned to his personal workspace. The communication was from Earth, marked with the highest security classifications. When he activated it, the face of President Lee Myongbak appeared on his screen. "Major Daiho," the president said, "congratulations on your promotion to colonel. The promotion is effective immediately." Daiho felt surprised but honored. Colonel was a rank he had never expected to achieve, especially at his age. "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored by your confidence." "The promotion comes with new responsibilities," the president continued. "The Federation Council has voted to establish a new military command structure for our expanding territory. You're being assigned to lead the Colonial Defense Corps for the entire galactic sector." The scope of the assignment was staggering. Daiho would be responsible for protecting not just human colonies, but all the worlds that had joined the Federation. It meant coordinating with dozens of species, managing resources across hundreds of systems, and preparing for potential conflicts with the Empire. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a large command," Daiho said honestly. President Lee smiled. "Colonel, you turned a single beacon in an old rifle into a victory that changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The Council believes you can handle the responsibilities." After the communication ended, Daiho sat in his office thinking about how much had changed since that morning when he walked into the Imperial base, carrying his battered weapon. The rifle still hung on his wall, but now it was surrounded by awards, commendations, and gifts from grateful species across the galaxy. A soft chime indicated another visitor. Captain Han So-young entered, now wearing the uniform of the Federation Intelligence Service. Her job was to monitor Imperial activities and coordinate with resistance movements on occupied worlds. "Congratulations on the promotion, Colonel," she said with a smile. "The news is already spreading through the station." "Thank you," Daiho replied. "What's the latest intelligence from Imperial space?" So-young's expression became serious. "The Empire is changing, but not in ways we expected. Emperor Zalthon has been replaced by his nephew, Prince Zekmor. The new emperor is younger and more aggressive than his predecessor." This was concerning news. The old emperor had been cautious after the Kepler defeat, focusing on defensive strategies. A younger, more aggressive leader might be willing to take greater risks. "What are his intentions?" Daiho asked. "Unknown," So-young admitted, "but our sources suggest he's developing new military technologies, something he believes will restore Imperial superiority over human forces." Daiho studied the intelligence reports on his desk. The Empire had vast resources and thousands of years of technological advancement. If they focused their efforts on developing weapons specifically designed to counter Federation tactics, they might regain their military edge. "Any details on these new technologies?" "Very limited information," So-young replied. "The research is being conducted on the Imperial capital world under maximum security. Our agents can't get close enough to learn specifics." "Keep monitoring the situation," Daiho ordered. "If the Empire is planning something new, we need to know about it before they're ready to use it." Later that evening, Daiho walked through the station's civilian sections. The corridors were filled with beings from across the galaxy, all living and working together peacefully. Human children played with young Manthari in the recreation areas. Kethvar engineers worked alongside human technicians on maintenance projects. This was what the Federation represented at its best. Different species cooperating for mutual benefit rather than one group dominating others. It was the opposite of the Imperial model, where conquest and submission were the only relationships between species. But Deho knew that peace required constant vigilance. The Empire might be retreating now, but they were far from defeated. Somewhere in Imperial space, new weapons were being developed and new strategies planned. The next confrontation might not end as favorably for the Federation. He paused at one of the station's viewing ports to look out at the planet below. Kepler 442b had become a symbol of human determination and tactical intelligence. The small mining colony had grown into a major industrial center, producing quantum crystals and advanced materials for the Federation's expanding fleets. More importantly, it had become a beacon of hope for species throughout the galaxy. The victory at Kepler 442b proved that the Empire could be defeated, that smaller nations could resist domination by more powerful ones. Colonel Lee Deho looked at his reflection in the viewing port glass. A year ago, he had been a colonial defense captain with an old rifle and a desperate plan. Now he commanded forces spread across dozens of star systems and bore responsibility for millions of lives. The rifle that had started everything still sparked occasionally when he cleaned it. Some things never changed, no matter how advanced the technology around them became. But that was okay. Sometimes the most important tools were the ones that looked ordinary on the surface while hiding extraordinary capabilities beneath. The galaxy was changing,